It's George Gruhn here again on Friday for a question and answer session. And for those who haven't listened before, this is available simultaneously on Facebook, and it is also archived there and available, and also on YouTube. You can see this and previous sessions. So if you miss part or wish to come back to it, it's available. I'm reachable easily at my email address, george@guitars.com, GUITARS.com, or at the shop phone number, 615-256-2033, 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Central Time. So we're always looking forward to hearing from our listeners, and that's what's up for now. I'd like to start by showing a couple of guitars that I think are rather interesting. We sell a lot of new Martins, but one that I think is an interesting guitar, bang for the buck. This is the DSS-17 model. These have only been on the market for a little over 1 year, but they are a rather plain guitar. The map price, $15.59, with a good quality padded gig bag. Not a really fancy guitar, matte finish. It's a very thin finish, which leaves it very responsive. Lightweight guitar, it's almost featherweight. Slope shoulder D. It has a what looks like mahogany, it's probably Sapele, neck, back, and sides. Citrus spruce top. Indian rosewood fingerboard and bridge, white, sort of antique white binding on the top edge of the body, tortoise shell grain pick guard, and it is a remarkably responsive, good guitar, which bang for the buck is absolutely a better guitar than many instruments costing 3 times as much. It's an example of how it's possible to produce a truly good quality instrument, stage worthy, for an affordable price. And certainly Martin's not alone in doing that. Taylor has come out with some new models that also are quite affordable, full size, and matte finish, but made in USA. Good quality instruments. The quality of new instruments is actually improving, so that many of these are better playability and better sound than what was available 50 years ago. But as I've said many times, 50 years ago was 1970, which sometimes I find hard to accept. But I've been in business that long. I've been collecting longer than that. I started this shop as GTR Incorporated, abbreviation for guitar, changed the name, but started in 70, January 70, changed the name to Gruhn Guitars in 76. But a lot has happened in the meantime, but the quality of new guitars today is very significantly better now than it was in 1970. Another interesting new guitar. This is one that I had a bit of a hand in. This is the Martin Grando Opry guitar. Martin made an Opry guitar 20 years ago that had this same peg head inlay, Grando Opry, but it had a white plastic fingerboard, a micarta plastic fingerboard with red plastic Grando Opry inlay on the fingerboard, which I found a bit garish, but the real problem was the plastic board doesn't expand and contract at the same rate that wood does, so it was not always compatible. This has the pearl Grando Opry logo on the pick guard, herringbone top trim, Sitka spruce with scalloped forward shifted bracing, herringbone trim, Indian rosewood back and sides. It's a very good quality guitar. So it not only has some interesting ornamentation, and it was a limited edition of 100, but $3,500 with hard shell case. And it is a truly good guitar. So for those who are Opry fans and would like to combine Opry fan with good quality guitar, this can do it. I'll plow into some questions that we have received from our listeners. Jeff Bullock in Beechwood, Ohio says, I have protected my guitars from low humidity with a humidifier, but I do not do anything during the summer months in Ohio where we can have string of days with high humidity, 70% or higher. So far, I've not run into problems. Do you think low humidity is a higher risk for guitars, or are both low and high humidity a reason for concern? After several years, does a guitar become less vulnerable to changes in humidity as it ages? First, does it become less prone to changes? Slightly, yes. As it ages, the wood does become more stable, but that takes many years. And I wouldn't risk that, because even on a very old guitar, maybe 50 years old or even 100 years old, humidity that's too low or too high is a problem. So it only becomes slightly less susceptible. But high humidity is a problem. It can cause wood to expand and can really throw your guitar out of order. It's less likely to cause a crack, but it can certainly get your guitar to be out of order enough to be almost unplayable. So high humidity, and 70% would be high humidity. And just because the humidity is 70% outdoors does not mean it's going to be 70% indoors. Typically, with air conditioning, the humidity is not going to get that high in the house. Air conditioning removes a great deal of humidity from the air. In fact, if any of you look, you can see a great deal of the air conditioners have a drain, and there's going to be quite a bit of moisture coming out of that. So that is something that is worthy of consideration, that air conditioning will help. In the winter, humidification is important, and that is something that we would recommend be held not less than 40% humidity, preferably 45 to 50% is ideal. Now, it may be hard to keep it within that exact 5% range, but that's the ideal range. And when you're starting to get over 60% humidity, you're likely to encounter problems. So that's, again, what I would recommend. And generally, we don't see a lot of people having trouble in an air-conditioned home in the summer, although when you get into places, if you're in South Florida and you leave your windows wide open and you're not air conditioning, you certainly could have problems. So, but that's not where you are. Steve Chrysophilae, Newport Beach. I've had many acoustic guitars, mostly long scale. Some play easily with a light touch, and others I have to fight. What all these guitars have in common is low action and light gauge strings. Can you please explain the physics of proper setup and why some are easier to play and others are stiff? I thought I read somewhere where Jimmy DeQuisto said if a guitar is properly set up, it should require the very lightest touch to play. At any rate, Jimmy DeQuisto liked things that were very easy to play, but his guitars set up the way he liked them would not be good for really bearing down hard for orchestral rhythm. They'd be great in the studio. And how you set them up depends also on just what style of music you're going to play. If you're playing archtop guitar as a rhythm instrument in a jazz band where you're trying to sound like Freddie Green did with Count Basie, you need heavy strings, high action, and a heavy touch. If you're wanting to play with a light touch in the studio and do modern, real smooth, mellow jazz, that's a whole different setup. And certainly flat top guitar setup is different from arch top. Almost everything that Jimmy made, I might say almost, he made a very few flat tops, but the vast majority of what he made was arch tops. And that's a different beast. But for flat top guitars, a lot of players do want the action to be medium rather than super light. And they may use medium gauge strings as well. But the basic elements of string action may be measured at the 10th fret or the 12th fret for how high it is, and also at the 1st fret. And then between that, there's a lot of leeway as to how much relief there may be in that neck. If you have a bowed neck, you may have action that's not super high, but it can be really hard to play. If you have an absolutely straight neck with no relief in it at all, you're probably going to encounter buzzing if you play it all hard. The ideal is to have a little bit of relief to the neck, and knowing how much of that you can set up is a critically important thing. A little bit of relief, 1/1000th or 2/1000th of an inch, can make quite a difference in feel. It's barely measurable, but it can make a major difference on feel. The other thing is, action is not the same as if you have a good neck set angle. You may have low action with a good neck set angle, or if you have a rather shallow neck set angle, the same action may feel quite different. So setup is often enough just a matter of adjusting nut height and saddle height and neck profile. And if all of those are working together, it will feel better. But if you have the action a little higher than it needs to be at the nut, things can feel quite stiff. You have to get this balance between nut slots, where is the action set at both ends, and that relief in the middle, but also neck set angle needs to be right for things to truly perform at their best. Greg Voros, our shop foreman, did a Facebook video on our Facebook site, August 4th, I believe. You can check, it's about guitar setup. It's a 10-minute presentation. And I think you might find that interesting and helpful, because he does cover this type of material. But it is true, you could have two guitars with what looks like the same action at the 12th fret and the same gauge strings, and they certainly can feel quite different. The other thing is, the action and the feel of a dreadnought guitar can be quite different from a smaller Martin, single O or double O, and same with Gibsons. The big body ones, even with the same scale, do not feel the same. Some guitars feel inherently stiffer. And some guitars also, where the top is, frankly, to my opinion, at least thinner than it ought to be, feel stiff. So even the basic construction of the guitar can have quite an impact on what it feels like, how supple those strings are. John in Richmond, Virginia says, given the vast knowledge you've gained during their 50+ years in vintage guitar business, along with famous musicians you know and other interesting people you have dealt with, do you have any thoughts about writing a book? And the answer is yes, I have thoughts on it. I have a few drafts of some ideas. Am I far along on the project? Not really, but it's something that a year or two from now I may very well have. So I have been thinking about it because a lot of people are urging me to do it. I don't think that the world is badly in need of another coffee table book with pretty guitar pictures. And there's a great deal of information available free online about guitars, especially factual information about guitars is more readily available now than it ever has been. You may have to weed through quite a bit online to get to what you really want, but there's a lot available. And my experience is that a book with facts about guitars, while you can copyright the page, you can't copyright the concepts. So, but a book about life experiences, that's like a novel. People don't want a paraphrased novel, they want the real thing. So that's probably the direction I will go, not a novel, but life experiences, basic philosophy of what's going on in the market and why. That is something that I am seriously considering doing in the near future. Steve Shobe in Middletown, Connecticut. Thanks for doing these webinars. It seems that a Gibson ES335 with dot fingerboard inlays is thought of as more desirable than one with dot block inlays. Why is that? Well, obviously, dots versus blocks does not make a guitar good or bad. But the early 335s, which were first introduced in 1958, had dot inlays. And they continued to have dots right into very early in '62, after which it went to block inlays. And the early dot inlay ones were the ones with the patent applied for pickups. So that tends to be very highly thought of, and therefore they bring more money. That's like Les Pauls, with the Sunburst Les Pauls of mid-58 through 59 are very, very valuable. The dot 335s of that same period have the exact same pickups and the same type of wiring harness as a Sunburst Les Paul. Those are considered to be the ultimate cream of the crop of Gibsons. But the early block inlay ones from 62 through early in the year 65 are still very good guitars with neck dimensions very similar to the 1960 model. And they have the basic same designs, tunematic bridge and stop tailpiece. But then after that, during 65, they went from the stop tailpiece to the trapeze tailpiece, which does not give you adjustable tension downward on the bridge. And also by late 65 and into 66, they went to a much narrower neck. Neck dimensions changed. And they also changed a bit on the shape of the cutaways. Instead of the Mickey Mouse ears, they were a little bit narrower and, to many people's opinion, not quite as attractive. At any rate, those bring less money. But again, it's not a matter of people preferring dots versus blocks. It's that the rest of the guitar changed. There's nothing about having block inlays on the board that would make it less good. After all, the Sunburst Les Pauls that bring huge money, hundreds of thousands, have big trapezoid inlays, which they're way bigger than dots. And the point is, it's not the desirability of one inlay versus the other. It's what goes on with the rest of the instrument. George Scanelli, I'm looking at two Guild guitars, a 1955 Guild Aristocrat M75, and also a 1955 X550B. The M75 is a hollow Guild. It looks roughly the size of a Les Paul, and it's thin and it has no sound holes. It looks like a solid body guitar. It's featherweight, and it has two pickups, single coil by Franz. They look similar to P90 Gibson pickups. That's one of the most desirable of Guild electric guitars of the 1950s. It's quite sought after. Doesn't sound like a Les Paul, but it's a good sounding guitar. The X550B is a 17-inch wide cutaway, full depth arch top guitar that similar in dimension to a full-size arch top acoustic, but this is laminated construction, still has but it's a good sounding guitar with two, the early ones have single coil pickups, and then later they have the narrow Guild humbuckers, and later yet they have wider humbuckers, also still Guild humbuckers that are more close in dimension to Gibson humbuckers. But the point is, it's a totally different beast. These are both plenty good guitars. And this is a time when Guild quality was very good. Those would have been made in Hoboken, New Jersey. Guild started in New York, but they were there only very briefly and then moved to Hoboken. And then around 67 is when they moved to Westerly, Rhode Island. And they were there on into the 1990s. The company changed ownership. It got sold to Avnet, a big holding company, and later got sold to a group from Chattanooga, of which I was part briefly, from mid-86 through August of 86 through 89. Then it got sold to a different outfit, Chuck Foz, and then it got sold to Fender, and then Fender later moved it to Corona, California, and then later moved it to Tacoma, Washington, and then they moved it again later to the old Ovation factory in New Hartford, Connecticut. And then they finally sold it to the present owners of Guild, who are doing Asian imports and some in California at a new factory they built there. So Guild has gone through lots of changes. And the new Guilds are still good guitars. But the ones that you're looking at, 55 was a year when Guild was definitely still an independent company, owned and run by Alfred Drange, and definitely a desirable, good quality instrument. Person Joe says he owns a Breedlove RD M model he bought in 1995. Mahogany back and sides, bear claw spruce top, has a braced top. I've never seen on any other guitar. The brace is attached from the end pin and then attached to the top. Interesting idea that I guess no one other than Steve Henderson at Breedlove liked. I like the guitar because it's a really nice low end. It plays well. It's worked on, so had it worked on several years ago and had the frets replaced. And even with humidification, the northeast is not kind to guitars. Anyway, looking at any insights on what the designers were looking for. Well, what you're talking about is a bridge doctor. And if you look up bridge doctor online, you will see what this gizmo is. It attaches with a rod at the end block to a block of wood that is then has an attachment to the bridge plate, and it reduces the tendency of a top to buckle up. It holds that top down. And it's particularly good if you have a rather thin top that is inclined to flex. This is not something that is unique to Breedlove. The Bridge Doctor was available separately, and plenty of people put them in a variety of guitars. I personally am not fond of them. I think that it's something that is good if your top is too thin to be stable, but I'd rather have a top that is thick enough and braced properly that it doesn't need that. And I feel that to a certain extent it does impede vibration and dynamic range. But again, that is a matter of personal preference. But is the Bridge Doctor unique to Breedlove? I think only insofar as I don't know of any other maker that used those routinely in many of the models that they made. But it is a gizmo that can be installed in other guitars and was actually designed where it could be retrofitted and was primarily for guitars that had problems with the top buckling up. But Breedlove, I'm at least assuming, wanted to use it so that they could use a thinner top. And if their tops were thin enough that they would not be stable without help, then the Bridge Doctor would do that. And of course, Breedlove, they were good enough, they knew how to make a guitar with a thicker top. It was their choice to make a guitar with a thinner top, but use this reinforcement system so that it would be stable. I have a question that came in from Scott Major, and his statement here: I have heard you say that the best time for acoustic and archtop guitars was pre-World War II era, with the second best being right now. What is your opinion of modern Gibson archtops as compared to the classic ones, such as Gibson Super 4000 compared to the golden era Super 400s, and what eras should be avoided? Also, what modern strings do you suggest for archtops? Well, for one thing, the Super 4000 Gibson hasn't been made in quite a while. That was a Chet Atkins model. It was quite expensive, but it was a good guitar. But it was a guitar that listed at over $25,000. And it was designed as a acoustic with a floating pickup. But my opinion still is that Gibson's finest archtops for just great sound were from the 1920s onward up to World War II. But that's primarily talking then about non-cutaway archtop guitars, which are not, in the mind of most players, truly modern jazz guitars. Gibson first came out with a cutaway in the 1939 catalog, offering that on the Premier model L5 and Premier model Super 400, which were two cutaway models. Those were top of the line guitars, and they didn't do much else in cutaway guitars until after World War II. During the war, production was greatly curtailed. Gibson couldn't get metal for tailpieces, adjustable truss rods, and they could use up parts they had, but there were actually wartime regulations where it was regulated what you could and could not do. And musical instrument production was very drastically reduced during World War II as a result. Brass wind instruments could not be made at all. Pianos could not be made because they had a cast iron frame and it was regulated that you could have only very little metal content. In fact, Grover made lightweight tuners with plastic buttons and thinner metal for wartime regulations, and Gibson had guitars during the war for a brief period where they had no truss rods other than just wood reinforcement in the neck. They did some laminated necks to make them stronger, but this was a period of real hardship for any of the manufacturers. Martin quit using the non-adjustable steel T-bar in the neck because they could not get them during the war. And they also went to much thinner tuners that were wartime regulation. And but again, Martin and Gibson at least continued to make guitars, and Harmony and Kay in Chicago also continued to make guitars throughout the war. But some of the Harmony and Kay instruments actually for archtops had wood rather than metal tailpieces. And on the Gibson guitars during the war, some of those had a lightweight tailpiece with a metal trapeze, but the crossbar that the strings attached to was made of wood rather than metal to keep the metal content within wartime regulations. This was actually government, federal mandated metal requirements, but most musical instrument production of guitars was simply shut down entirely in the USA during the war. And during that time also, music stores were under great pressure because they could not get product that they really needed. For example, student model violins were primarily from Germany, France, and Eastern Europe and Japan. And of course, during World War II, those sources were completely cut off. So that's another factor. Today, there are many archtop builders, but the number of people buying archtop high-end guitars is still very limited. But there are builders today that are doing some very good instruments. Benedetto has retired from building handmade guitars, but the Benedetto company is continuing to make good quality jazz guitars. John Monteleone in Long Island is producing superb quality guitars, but they're extremely expensive, but he's still making as many as he seems able to, which if he can make one a month, that's probably top what he can do, but he's making very, very expensive and extremely fine guitars. So quality overall is still good, even for production models, even out of China. For example, the Eastman guitars are surprisingly good. And the quality of Chinese labor these days is way better than it used to be. They're perfectly able to do not only machine carving, but hand carving. Chinese labor is still cheaper than US labor, but they can use good quality materials and they have good quality design work, often working with American companies to build guitars to those specs. But again, they now have enough players in China who know what a guitar is supposed to look like, feel like, and sound like, that progress has gone a long way toward closing the quality gap. So it used to be that US was the best, and still I think is. Although obviously for classical guitars, there are European makers doing great ones, and for that matter, there's some European makers doing just fine handmade guitars in general. There's nothing wrong with German or French craftsmanship, or some in even the Czech Republic is doing very good work. So this is all possible now. And at any rate, there's no lack of good instruments new today. And the new Gibsons are good guitars. Do I think they are going to beat my 1924 L5? No, but not everybody wants a guitar like my 1924 L5. I love that guitar. It's my favorite guitar, but it has a rather big, somewhat V-shaped neck. It's a non-cutaway archtop. It has medium action. Some people would call it high action, but it's exactly where I want it. So far as strings, there are plenty of good quality strings. I personally really like Martin strings, but Darko makes great strings. And for electric guitars, there's a wide variety of strings. But for archtop and acoustic guitars in general, I like bronze wrapped strings, but there are monosteel strings that really do sound quite good, and Martin makes those as well. So, and for that matter, Gibson has good strings, and there are enough string makers out there to keep one talking a long time. In general, string quality these days is good. And I'm going to take a brief break from me and put Gary on, and he can talk about a couple of items, but one moment.
Oh, gosh. I need to get
Picks. You can pick. How about picking up Chinese guitars? I'll get something else.
You go ahead. You go ahead and redo something else.
Yeah. Gary's going to run off and get another guitar, so I'm going to show you something else in the meantime. I had mentioned Chinese guitars. Here's a guitar by Altamira that is a copy of a Selmer, French Selmer, like Django Reinhardt played. This is a Chinese company. It's a small company, but their owner studied in Spain, and they actually have a genuine Torres guitar that they've been studying, and they have a real Selmer. This guitar has tuners that are copied from the Selmer, tailpiece, bridge design, internal bracing, and this is one of the best sounding Gibson jazz guitars I've heard. And I've been saying for some time that Chinese quality is improving. Not everything coming out of China is great, but some are. And I've compared this guitar, which new, this particular one here is $1,250. I put this next to some guitars that are $5,000 new from hand builders. And this guitar holds its own very nicely. So quality is not always simply a function of price. Frank DeTuri asks, any thoughts on comparing a 1930s KG-14, that's Kalamazoo model made by Gibson, with a 1930s LO Gibson? I see several remakes with ladder bracing lately. Okay, well, the KG-14 and the L0 Gibson are the same size and shape. It's 14 3/4 inches wide, 14 fret neck. Both have mahogany neck, back, and sides, spruce top. The L0, both have actually Rosewood bridge and fingerboard, but the L0 has, as do other Gibsons of the time, adjustable truss rod, which the KG-14 does not. The Kalamazoo brand didn't. And when Gibson did other brands for suppliers such as Montgomery Ward, had Recording King models, and there were a variety of other brands, but Kalamazoo was actually a house brand, but they were much cheaper. Those did not have adjustable truss rods. Only the Gibson brand did, even though they were both made in the Gibson factory. And typically, the Gibson model would have X bracing, and most of the others had simple ladder bracing, with the exception of a few. They did a Ray Whitley, two Ray Whitley models for Montgomery Ward that were slope shoulder dreadnoughts. They had a mahogany model and a rosewood model. And those were X-braced, but those still did not have an adjustable rod that was accessible. And the darndest thing is, on the Ray Whitley models, they actually had an adjustable rod, but they didn't have it where you could get at it. It was in the neck, but the peghead veneer covered it, so you couldn't get at the nut to adjust it, and you couldn't see that it was in there. It was in there, but it wasn't. It would have been adjustable if they permitted access to it, but they didn't, which was a rather strange turn. But at any rate, in general, the quality of an LO was, so far as sound and playability, in my opinion, considerably better than the Kalamazoo brand. And the Kalamazoo models were much, much cheaper. Most of those were no more than $10 list price, new. But keep in mind that $10 in the late 1930s was quite a bit different than $10 today. $1 would buy more than 30 times as much as it does today. So these were still not cheap. You could buy guitars in Sears catalog and Montgomery Ward catalog that were not made by Gibson. And some of those things, like Oscar Schmidt models in the 20s and 30s, could be under $5. But still, $1 bought more then than now. Jerry Wixentowski says, thank you for reviewing the Gibson jumbo models of the mid-30s through the early 40s. While I realize that each instrument has its unique characteristics, do you have a favorite among the jumbos from structure and tone perspective? And how do they compare in that respect to the banner logo SJs? And banner logos, and this logo that says only a Gibson is good enough on the peg head, and that's something that was done from 1942 through 45 on many Gibson guitars. There was a decal banner on the middle of the peg head. My personal favorite of all the Gibson dreadnought size pre-war models, and for that matter, all the Gibson dreadnought models that were ever made at any time in the history of Gibson, would be the advanced jumbo of the 1930s. It came out around 36 through 39, and they had Indian Rosewood back and sides. And also there was a Rosewood J200 that came out in 37, and that had, it was an SJ200 Super Jumbo 200. That also had Indian Rosewood back and sides, and as a prefix, SJ was Super Jumbo. But the SJ model that Jerry asked about, made with the banner logo during the war, it first came out in 42. In that one, that was Southern Jumbo, not Super Jumbo, and it didn't have any model prefix or non-suffix after it. It was just simply an SJ, Southern Jumbo. And those are good guitars, the wartime Gibsons, but compared to the advanced Jumbo, I don't think they hold a candle to it. The advanced Jumbo was, I still think, the most powerful guitar Gibson made as an acoustic flat top prior to World War II. And they are quite amazing. There are reissues that are still made today, which sound plenty good. Gibson's new flat tops are good, but does the new one sound like the original pre-war model? The answer is no, it doesn't. The pre-war model was almost magical. It is also the only pre-war dreadnought size Gibson that featured a 25 1/2 inch scale. The other models were 24 3/4 inch scale. And that does make a difference. It's possible to make a great guitar with either scale, but it does still make a difference which scale you use. Daryl Wolf has a question. Says, with respect to Martin guitars, can you speak to so-called deal killer repairs such as bridge plate replacement, headstock cracks, and light overspray. I feel that some of these are overestimated in terms of devaluation, especially when nearly undetectable. And yes, I agree with that. It is possible to do a bridge plate replacement and do it well. And there are times when it is needed. And I have had customers tell me, oh, it just ruins the guitar, it'll never sound the same. And the fact is, if you have a bridge plate that is cracked and is structurally unstable, it's not going to sound good. And if it's structurally unstable, it can damage the top of your guitar if you don't fix it or replace it. Some can be fixed, but some truly just are beyond that and need replacement. And we've had very good success in our own repair shop replacing bridge plates. And generally with a plate similar in dimension to the original, we've seen plenty of repairs that I would not agree with. You have a huge plate that does grossly larger than original and thicker, which may be strong, but dampens sound. The proper plate should not be big, or at least no bigger than the original. But we have also seen some guitars that have been refinished and top sanded a bit, where it's not only damaged the bridge plate, but where your top is starting to buckle up. And in those cases, we've had excellent success with bridge plates, sandwich construction with maple and an inner laminate of carbon fiber, and then more maple. It looks like a normal enough bridge plate. It's lightweight. It's structurally very strong. And our experience is that those plates not only are structurally stable, but that the guitars sound excellent with them. It requires a considerable amount of skill to replace a bridge plate on a Martin because they are tucked into the X bracing. So it's a lot harder to replace a Martin bridge plate than a Gibson bridge plate, but either one can be done if you know how. So far as cracked peg heads, I've seen, and we have done repairs where it can come out good enough that it is not only structurally stable, but virtually invisible, where virtually anybody I would hand it to would be unable to tell that the work had ever been done. We still reveal what we did. If we're selling a guitar and we repaired a broken peg head, we tell you. But should it be a deal killer? I think not, if it's priced accordingly. It would not be proper to represent it as being exactly the same value, but a repaired peg head will not hurt the sound or the playability, and if it's done properly, can be structurally very strong. And to me, that should not be a deal killer. If somebody doesn't want it because we did that work, well, we don't have to please everybody. If we're fixing a guitar to our satisfaction, we can hang it on the wall. And if you come in and like it, you can buy it. If you don't like it, you can look at others and you could buy one of them. And if we have nothing that you like, we're not obligated to sell you one, and you're not obligated to buy one. Obviously, we do aim to please. But the point is, if somebody thinks that for them it's a deal killer that they cannot, for any price, buy one with a repaired peg head, well, they're entitled to that opinion. But if one with a repaired peg head suits you in playability and in sound and is priced accordingly, which should be less than one that has not been repaired, I see no reason to not buy it. But if you don't want one, you don't have to buy it. But good repair enhances value. And I've learned over the years that there are some things that turn out to be repairable that when I first started in business, I would never have dreamed were repairable. But I've seen enough and we've learned enough over the years to realize that they're in the right skilled hands. Some things that we used to think were not repairable indeed turn out to be very repairable, and the results can be good. Light overspray is going to hurt value for a collector. It will reduce monetary value of an instrument if it's been lightly oversprayed. It will reduce value much more if it's been heavily oversprayed, because a very light overspray may not affect sound and may not look too bad, but a really thick, goopy overspray is going to tremendously diminish the acoustic response of the instrument. It will greatly lower its monetary value. On the other hand, if we're talking about solid body guitars, from a utilitarian point of view, you're not going to have a huge difference in sound if a solid body electric, or for that matter, a laminated body electric like an ES335, if that's been oversprayed, it won't affect the playability or the sound. It will impact the monetary value. For a strict collector, that may kill it. But for a utility player, that may not make any difference at all. And when I talk about utility player, I don't mean to demean what a utility player may be. Some of the best players, musicians the world has ever known are utility tool users. Bill Monroe and his mandolin, or Earl Scruggs and his banjo, or Muddy Waters and Buddy Guy, and even Eric Clapton. If you look at guitars that Eric has used, Blackie and Brownie, his two most famous Stratocasters, were very highly reworked. And they didn't have original finish on the body, but they certainly didn't hold him back. And he didn't worry about whether they were totally original. He didn't represent them as being totally original either, but so far as sound and playability, they suited him just fine. So if it was an acoustic guitar, a refinished job will very likely change the sound in a negative way. But on an electric, it may not. And certainly Gilmore's Stratocaster that recently bought $4 million at auction, that was highly reworked, not very original. If it wasn't his, wouldn't be collectible. And it would be a deal killer if you're a collector of original instruments and you saw one in that condition. But from a memorabilia collector's point of view, no problem. So again, some things just can't be fixed. If an acoustic guitar has been refinished and they sanded the top half the thickness it was when it started out and it's structurally unstable, it's not going to sound right, it's not going to play right, it's going to give a lot of trouble. That's a deal killer. But really, really qualified craftsmen are able to make most instruments quite serviceable and marketable. Lawrence Harris says, I recently got a Yamaha FG 830 acoustic guitar with laminate rosewood back and sides, solid Sitka spruce top. Sound and feel is amazing. What are your thoughts on Yamaha guitars? Well, Yamaha makes a lot of different models. And over the years, their specs have changed. But John Denver had several Yamaha guitars that were very, very good and were handmade, expensive instruments. They're fine quality. And They make a lot of different models at Yamaha. Their quality is good, bang for buck. You're getting what you pay for. And good electric guitars, they make good acoustic guitars. Are they beating Martin at their game? I don't think so. But they're good. And there's just more good guitar makers today, good guitars than almost ever before in the history of the instrument. Have they made the old original golden era instruments obsolete? No. But some of these make guitars that are good enough that I find quite inspiring to listen to and to play. Yes, they do. And we have custom shop Martins that really do a lot for me. And I've heard some new Taylor guitars lately that are the best that they've ever made. And some of them are mighty good. So there are plenty of makers with large-scale production doing good work, and there are certainly small-scale makers doing good work. And so far as electric guitars, there are individual luthiers, as well as small and mid-size and large makers doing surprisingly fine work. And there are also makers of metal hardware for guitars and pickups that are doing good work, better now than they were 50 years ago. Not necessarily any better, in my opinion, or as good as even the original PAF humbucking pickup or great 1952 or 3 Telecaster pickup, but approaching it to the point where there's no question that new guitars today are good enough that even highly sophisticated players can find them very serviceable. You don't have to have an old one to sound good. In the early 70s, the new ones really weren't what a good professional musician would want. You almost had to get a used or vintage one to get the best quality. That's not true today. You can get new guitars that are very stage worthy and very good in the studio. But I'm still of the opinion that the true golden era instruments have not been beaten, either as investments or to play. So to Steve O'Connell, do you think there'll be a day where solid wood will not be available? Perhaps 20 years from now or whatever. The answer is no, I don't think so. At least I don't think so in our lifetime. In terms of my lifetime, maybe less years ahead of me than some of the folks listening, since I'll be 75 on the 21st of this month. But I think even 100 years from now, assuming that human civilization doesn't blow itself up in the meantime, that solid wood for guitars will still be available. But tropical rainforests are endangered. Tree farms will continue, and hopefully conservation will save forests. We certainly need those forests. We need biodiversity. We need our planet to stay healthy, to support civilization as we've known it. And if we don't do that, we will be in deep trouble, because right now the air is raining acid and mercury. And in some ways, it's unsafe to breathe in major cities. And the water table is low enough in some of the great aquifers that you can drill a deep artesian well and you don't get water anymore. Or if you do, you get brine, which you can't irrigate with. And you have a situation where the oceans are turning acidic, and if the rainforests disappear, they produce some of the oxygen we breathe, and we feed too much antibiotics to our poultry and cattle, and the bacteria are now resistant to all the antibiotics, and we're running out of clean fuel. And if you can't eat, and you can't breathe, and you can't drink, and your medicines don't work, and you're running out of fuel, it's going to mess up the guitar market. But if we use sensible conservation techniques, trees are still standing that have been growing for well over 100 years, some over 500 years. And spruce does not have to be super expensive. There are alternative woods that still work. That you can make solid wood guitars out of a variety of guitar woods. Walnut works well, maple works well, mahogany is great and is still available. But also there's alternative woods like sapele and ovengal. Makers like Taylor use quite a wide variety of woods. And they're not going to run out anytime soon. It's not going to be where every guitar for an acoustic has to be laminate. And they're not going to have to make solid body guitars out of plastic. There are some synthetics and composites that actually do work quite well. But overall, will we run out of solid wood for guitars anytime soon? No. Will we run out of Brazilian rosewood? Well, it's already on Appendix 1 of CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And some species, like Madagascar rosewood, are very endangered. Indian rosewood is not so endangered. Maple is not especially endangered. Walnut is not particularly endangered. And there will be solid wood available, suitable for making good guitars. And fine craftsmen will still be producing instruments. The boutique builders aren't going to run out of wood. Companies trying to make 100,000 guitars a year will find some types of wood will not be available in the quantities they would like. And there will be choices that have to be made in that regard. But we will have the potential to make good guitars. Electric, solid body, semi-hollow, acoustics. And the other point is it is actually possible to make quite a good guitar with a solid spruce top and laminate back and sides. The original Selmers were two-ply. They'd have like rosewood on the outside and mahogany on the inside, but it wasn't just a paper thin. It was just an equal thickness of each. So that's another, you could say that's a laminate, but in effect it's two-ply. And it does have tonal characteristics of both of those types of wood. But the day is not yet here when we simply don't have guitar wood. As long as there are guitar customers, I think there will be guitar wood. John Thompson says, I'd love to hear George talk about the J180 Everly Brothers guitar. The Everly guitar came out in the early 60s and was similar in size to the previous Gibson J185, 16 inches wide, sort of hourglass shape, basically about the same shape as an ES-175 Gibson, except no cutaway, but it had a flat top guitar. So Gibson did plenty of arch top guitars in that size. Even the ES-125 is that exact body shape, but this is an acoustic guitar. The Everlys had played on Gibson J200 models with double pick guards, and when they had the opportunity to be endorsers and design their own model, they had a 16-inch wide guitar, similar in shape to the J200, but an inch smaller in width. Maple back and sides, spruce top, but they painted them jet black, so the wood grain really didn't matter. And they had rosewood fingerboard with star inlays, and star inlay on the peg head. And they were flashy looking guitar, big double pick guards of their own design. And those guitars are quite collectible. By the late 60s, they changed the specs where they had natural finish tops and different design pick guard. The early pick guards were nitrocellulose tortoise shell, and sometimes that pick guard will deteriorate with age and crumble. The later ones had black pick guards, slightly different shape, and those are much less sought after. But the original Everly Brothers models will bring over $10,000, and they are fine instruments. Although personally, for playing myself, I'd rather have a J185. To me, the J185 was the best post-war model Gibson guitar made. But it doesn't look like an Everly Brothers because although it's the basic shape, basic same size guitar, it has choice of sunburst or natural, has double parallelogram inlays, has Maltese cross inlays on the bridge, and has a one pick guard in tortoise shell plastic. But they're a very responsive guitar. The Everly Brothers model with the big double pick guards is rather less responsive because of that, but for heavy strumming, they work quite well. And depends what you're going to do with it. For Randy Farrell, I'll close with this one while watching. I'm strumming my 1998 HD28 Martin. Was that a good year for Martin? And yeah, by 1998, Martin's quality at that point was far better than it was in the 1970s. They were pretty good guitars. And they'd have a number of things going on. It changed quite considerably. The HD28 has a small maple bridge plate, whereas the 70s had a big rosewood plate. By 1998, they had an adjustable rod in the neck, which really worked quite well. So all of that comes together where 1998 is good. On the other hand, is it fully equivalent to the brand new one? The answer to that is no. Last year, Martin changed the specs on the HD28. The new HD28 has an antique white binding, whereas the previous one in 98 had just pretty much almost refrigerator white binding. The new one has forward shifted scallop bracing, whereas the 98 model had the rear shifted bracing. The 98 model had a 1 11/16 nut width. The new one has a 1 3/4 nut width and a different profile neck, which I personally like better. The new one has slotted diamond inlays similar to the pre-World War II original. And the one in 98 would have dot inlays. But the fact is that, well, in my personal opinion, I like the brand new one better. And Martin's made it more like the vintage one. They basically combined the HD28 with the HD28V model, which they had made for a while. And the new HD28 looks almost exactly like the previous HD28V. But the 1998 model is still a plenty good guitar. And it's absolutely good enough to take on stage and use professionally. But I can say that a lot of the companies are continuing to tweak their designs in ways that I think are inspired. Martin certainly has models that in some cases resemble more closely vintage, and in other cases have some more modern features, neck contours that I find very good. And also better intonation as far as the way they intonate the bridge saddle. At Martin, they do it more accurately now than they used to. And I'll say also other companies such as Taylor have been doing a great deal of redesign. And Andy Powers at Taylor deserves a great deal of credit. He's an absolutely brilliantly good designer. And he's not alone in this. There's numerous other companies out there, Collins, Santa Cruz, and it's Loudon. It's almost impossible to name all the ones. There are a lot of good builders out there today. And we are almost, I think it's not unfair to say we are in a second golden age of guitar building. As far as the quality also of student model guitars today is vastly superior to what was around when I started out. Today, instruments that are very modestly priced sound way, way better than the Harmony and K guitars when I was starting out in the early 60s. Those guitars that were hanging in the music stores then for beginner guitar players were not the best sound, but physically really rough to play, and they didn't hold up well. It's one reason why you don't see very many of them left anymore. They fell apart, and they were not worth restoring. People literally just threw them away. The cost of restoration to set one up would exceed the value of the guitar. That's not the case today. So student model instruments today are probably better now than they've ever been. And in that sense, we've got some good times here. So till next week, keep sending questions. The more, the better. And also, if and when you disagree with me on something, I want to hear about it. And you can email me direct, or you can call me here at the store. If you have something you want to discuss at some length, that may be a topic not necessarily suitable for this question and answer session, but you wanted to get an opinion, call me. I'm here and I'm available. And if you have something as far as intellectual debate on something I've said, I'm always interested in other people's opinions, especially when they don't agree with me, if they have something to back it up. If I say something you really think is wrong and you can show me evidence that I'm wrong, I'm ready to change an opinion and talk about it on the next presentation next week, or whichever week it may be. I do care about what you think, and I like in-depth, challenging questions. The more challenging they are, the more interesting they're likely to be. So please keep those questions coming. Let me know what you think. Till then, have a good one.